What does this airplane have in common with this airplane? We're going to tell you in Celebrating Aviation with Mike Machat. This is the Pratt & Whitney R-4360 WASP Major radial engine, 28-cylinder air-cooled power plant with more than 18,000 examples being built. Rather than go into detail on this engine, I'll mention that there are a number of excellent YouTube videos that I invite you to watch. Tells you everything you'd ever want to know about this, the specifications and the details of the engine. But what I'm going to do here is show you more than 20 different aircraft that were powered by the R-4360. We're going to start with the B-29. And no, the B-29 was not powered by the 4360. These are Wright 3350s. But the story begins here, because if you take the airframe of a B-29 and you add the 4360 and a taller tail, you have the B-50. If you take a B-50 wing and engine, you put it on a double-deck cargo fuselage, you have the C-97 Stratofreighter. If you take a Stratofreighter and add a tail boom and refueling pod, you have the KC-97. If you take a KC-97, remove the fuel apparatus, and add a passenger interior, you have the Boeing Stratocruiser. Take a Boeing Stratocruiser, take off the top and rebuild it as the Pregnant Guppy, then you have the world's first true outsize air cargo aircraft. And this shows you the variety of airframes that can all stem from one power plant. It also proves that with a successful engine, you can have a series of successful aircraft. This is a nacelle installation for a 4360. Let's show you the engine inside, fairly tightly cowled. And this particular aircraft, the power plant was augmented by twin General Electric superchargers. And that is the Hughes XF-11. This was an experimental prototype, one of two built, competing for an Air Force contract for a photo reconnaissance airplane in 1946. Here we see it airborne, quite sleek, twin pod, reminiscent of the P-38, but an example of the 4360 in a very advanced aircraft for its time. Now, here's a 4360 in a different aircraft, tightly cowled. This is a 4-engine airplane. It's the Republic XR-12 Rainbow. Here we see it as an engine run-up test is underway on the east ramp. And here we see the Rainbow with the novel flush cowl flaps in the open position. I should mention that the airplane had two designations. It started as the XF-12, XF meaning experimental photo. And then when designations changed after the Air Force was formed in 1947, it became the XR, R for reconnaissance, when the F went for fighter. I did a video on the Rainbow. I'm going to put a link to that video at the end of this program and explained all about it. But I'd also mentioned that the R-4360, in that video, I said that the engine was the largest, most powerful power plant ever mass produced. And with certain British power plants and an experimental Lycoming engine, many viewers wrote in, and I stand corrected. So I will restate it for the record that the R-4360 is the largest, most powerful mass-produced engine built in the United States. Here we see a good example of the installation on the Rainbow. I should mention that each nacelle is about the same size as the fuselage of a P-47 Thunderbolt. Here you see the waste gates on the superchargers underneath, and the thrust augmentation system. The trailing edge of the nacelle looks like a turboprop, but that's actually a thrust boosted exhaust, adding about 10% thrust to the 4360. As advanced as the Rainbow was in 1946, so was this airplane, the Northrop XB-35 Flying Wing. Here we see it powered by 4360s driving contra-rotating props. The YB-35, same airframe, but single propellers on the 4360s. A very advanced airplane, but too far ahead of its time. It lacked today's modern systems and digital flight controls, and it just was not a successful bombing platform. And that role was taken over by this airplane, the Convair B-36, originally fitted with 6 pusher R-4360s. and later augmented with 4 General Electric J-47 engines for additional thrust on takeoff and for dash speeds. And this is where the famous phrase came from, 6 turning and 4 burning. Now, if you take a B-36 wing and engine installation and put it on a double-deck cargo fuselage, you have the one-of-a-kind XC-99 experimental cargo aircraft. Only one was built. Here's the flight deck of that airplane, just to give you some flavor of that era. And here's the flight engineer station of another massive airplane. If you count those engines, that's 8. It can only be one, and yes, that's Howard Hughes standing on the right. This is the H-4 Hercules, also nicknamed the Spruce Goose, even though the airplane was built out of birch. But here we see the very advanced laminated wood construction technique before the airplane was painted. It looks like a beautiful piece of furniture, very compound curves and sleek, clean finish. The airplane was transported from its factory in Culver City to Long Beach, California, to fly as a seaplane in the harbor there. And here we see one of 8 trucks that moved the components of the aircraft along Pacific Coast Highway down to the Long Beach facility. Here we see the Hughes Special Dry Dock and Control Tower, and the airplane was assembled much like a large model. The 321-foot wingspan made it the largest airplane in the world at the time, and that was the largest wingspan ever flown until recently with the Strato launch up at Mojave. So here's the airplane about ready to be launched, and you see the engines installed. And its one and only flight took place on November 2nd, 1947, when the airplane lifted off and flew in ground effect at an altitude of 70 feet for 1 mile in about 1 minute. The airplane was put back in its hermetically sealed hangar and was never flown again. The role of troop transport, originally intended for the Spruce Goose, was then assigned to this airplane, the Lockheed Constitution. 2 prototypes were built, powered by 4360s, but again, it was deemed that the Navy would not go into the large troop transport role, and the 2 prototypes were scrapped, and this airplane was never put into production. This airplane, however, was. This is the Douglas C-74 Globemaster. The original prototype you see here fitted with the double bug-eye cockpit canopies. This was used in the Berlin airlift and evolved into the C-124 Globemaster II, nicknamed Old Shaky by anyone who flew on it. But it was a very novel aircraft, had a nose loading ramp, and here you see a good indication of the engine installation on the 124. This airplane, the Fairchild C-119 flying boxcar, had a tail loading ramp, and its experimental cousin, the XC-120, had a removable pod that could be slung under the fuselage for any number of different missions. This airplane was experimental only and never went into production. The Martin Company of Baltimore, Maryland, built 3 different aircraft powered by R-4360s. Here we see the Mercator Navy patrol bomber. This is the Mauler attack aircraft, and the Martin Mars flying boat. 2 of the Mars were converted to water bombers used up in Canada, and were successful airplanes in their era. Kind of a nice looking flying boat. This is the Republic XP-72, an experimental version of the P-47, fitted with the 4360 and contra-rotating propellers. Here we see it with a single prop, and this served as a test bed for the Republic Rainbow that we saw earlier. And finally, there were 3 experimental prototypes that were built, all powered by the 4360, the Vultee XA-41, the Douglas XBT-2D-1 Sky Pirate, and the Boeing XF-8B-1. Interesting and odd-looking airplanes, all using the same power plant. And this photo shows you why the airplane was called the Corn Cob. Here we see the installation on a Boeing Stratocruiser with the cowlings off. An amazing power plant, a successful engine that powered more than 20 different aircraft types. And there you have it, the story of the Pratt & Whitney 4360 WASP Major. Thank you for celebrating aviation with Mike Machat. As always, special thanks to the great folks who made this presentation possible. We certainly hope you enjoyed this, and until next time, take care.